Before we talk about Trump's first 100 days, we need to talk first about where the whole first 100 days thing came from in the first place. And I feel like I just used the same word 4 times in the opening sentence, but you know what? I'm just going to go with it. So, the idea of a president's first 100 days being some sort of arbitrary benchmark where we pause and take stock of how well the new chief executive has discharged his duties up to that point, it probably won't surprise you to learn it was invented out of whole cloth by the media Democrat industrial complex, and we've only been doing it for approximately 5 minutes in the grand scheme of things. So let's run through very briefly and call a few things what they are. By the time the signatures were dry on the Versailles Treaty, a global economic collapse was pretty much a foregone conclusion. That collapse inevitably takes place exactly a decade later in October of 1929. And parenthetically, let's stop pretending the crash of 1929 was an event that happened in New York City and whose consequences redounded all the way to Europe. It was actually an event that originated in Europe by the actions of a U.S. president who thought he could parlay our status as the country that tipped the balance for the forces of decency and assured their victory in the most horrid war ever into his status as history's most visionary social engineer, the man who reoriented world society along the bold, progressive lines that are fashionable in American college faculty lounges. You know how often I tell you there's never anything new under the political sun? Well, here's one of your better object lessons, because here we are in the year 2025, and we are still fighting against the worst impulses of wacky U.S. college professors who think they've got societal utopia all figured out. So the crash of 1929 happens, and thereby all the seeds are sown for a second and far more horrific world war exactly 1 decade later. I know it is a bit of a recurring theme that way. And the Democrats? They do what Democrats always do. They say, instead of trying to fix the problem, let's hang this albatross around the neck of the Republican president, and we'll kick his ass in the midterms next year, and we'll get one of our men back into the White House in 32. It'll be great. If we play this thing right, I bet we could even win with that guy in the wheelchair from New York. Meanwhile, Herbert Hoover is a perfectly competent, perfectly unobjectionable, middle-of-the-road Republican president. And let's not forget, in 1929, we're still living in a world where there have only been 2 Democrat presidents since Reconstruction. You had the 2 non-consecutive terms of Grover Cleveland and the 2 terms of Woodrow Wilson, and that's it. 12 years out of 60. So the stock market crash of 29, even though it had its actual origins in the hubristic acts of Wilson a decade prior, well, it became the perfect cudgel with which to beat Herbert Hoover about the head and upper torso, even though he was the last guy who had done anything to cause it, and the president in those days had very little power to intervene and directly try to fix the thing anyway. It was the first in a long line of examples of Democrats causing a problem, then blaming the problem on the Republicans, and using a compliant lapdog news media to parlay the false narrative into electoral victory. What's another example of that phenomenon? Well, today's Russia-Ukraine war, for a start. If a cabal of 3 women in Barack Obama's State Department didn't decide it would be a fun project to turn Ukraine into an outpost of progressive American liberalism, do you have a war going on today? Well, maybe you do. But it ain't this war, that's for damn sure. So the Democrats, as we know, they spin all kinds of political gold out of that 29 stock market crash and all the misery and human suffering that accompanied it. Not by coming up with ideas to help fix the thing right now, but by playing the game of, well, we've got great ideas for fixing this all stuff, but we can't get any of it done with all of this Republican obstructionism, so you're going to need to give us unchecked power over everything before you're going to start seeing any results. By the time you get to the 1932 presidential election, that wheelchair guy up in New York, he's figured out how to stand up long enough to give a speech. And the Democrats, well, they've succeeded in ruining Hoover and the Republicans to such an extent, far beyond their early prognostications or their wildest dreams, that they start getting emboldened, more emboldened than before. They say, you know, maybe we can do better than just taking the White House. Maybe we could remake the entire society along progressive socialist lines. Maybe we've got a chance to fully realize the dreams of our patron saint Woodrow Wilson. And that's exactly how they pitched it to the press. I mean, all except the Woodrow Wilson part. That was more implicit. And that's where the 100 days thing actually comes from. That was an FDR campaign line designed to convey the swiftness with which they were going to usher out the old, bad version of America that our founders founded and replace it with top-down, big government tax and spend socialist utopia. Was it successful? No. Not really. Most of the New Deal was quickly struck down by the courts since, it was all pretty wildly unconstitutional to begin with, and the vestiges of it that remain today exist mostly in name only. And the Great Depression was still going strong right up until the first bomb fell on Pearl Harbor, which FDR is in his third term in office by that point. Since we managed to get our guy into the White House, why not make him president for life? Which, as a practical matter, he did wind up being. So, good old Democrats always blowing through those guardrails while accusing the other side of having no respect for the guardrails. And just like those annoying last vestiges of the New Deal, we also are still stuck with the first 100 days thing, a totally meaningless distinction that is always invested with a great deal of gravitas, because not only is it a nice round number, but because the next original idea our news media have that doesn't have an antecedent that's at least 90 years old will be the first one. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, do you think it's a coincidence that fake news performance art yields an anagram of woke craftsman reaper nap? Because I don't. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I'm your eponymous host and humble servant. So Trump has had his mythical first 100 days, even though he's actually been the president for a total of 1,470 days, but I guess that's something only Grover Cleveland can fully understand and appreciate. And if you get your information about the world from the entertainment brands that we used to call news networks, well, you're probably hearing a lot of stuff about how this is the most disastrously failed first 100 days in the history of disastrous failure because, our friends in the fake news performance artist community, they are really deeply concerned with recovering their journalistic credibility. They've seen the polls that indicate they enjoy a level of public trust that is roughly commensurate with a child-molesting used car dealer. They've watched their ability to shape public opinion utterly collapse right before their eyes, and they are determined to make things right. Oh, wait, they're not actually doing any of that, are they? They are loudly and proudly doubling down on all of the same nonsense antics that made them into a public laughingstock in the first place. They are bound and determined, and of this there could be no further doubt, to ride the flaming wreck of the Bad Orange Man Express straight to the bottom of Eastwood Ravine. Or, depending on how old you are and which movie references you prefer, I guess we could just as well make a Slim Pickens Dr. Strangelove joke out of it, but either image is just as instructive when you get right down to it. But let's pretend, just for hypothetical shits and giggles, that our professional journalist class cared about doing journalism, or, for that matter, knew how to do journalism in the first place. If they wanted to get a sense of how well Trump has discharged his duties in the first 100 days of his term, mightn't they ask his voters for their assessment of the situation? Or, barring that, mightn't they look at the exit polls from the last election and take a look at how well the stated priorities of the Trump voters are aligned with the real-world results that have been delivered so far in his second term? Or is that all too damn much work, and it's easier to just blubber a bunch of nonsense sounds about Hitler and Nazis and authoritarianism and oligarchy? Oh my! And we know what the answer is, because we know this is not an exercise in informing the public. This is an exercise in trying to destroy a president, by any means necessary, by any means available. So the absolute last thing in the world they're actually going to do is talk to Trump voters and ask them for their assessment of the first 100 days. And you know why? Because if you ask the average Trump voter why they voted for Trump in 2024, that person is going to say, 1, I voted for Trump because I wanted a secure border. 2, I voted for Trump because I wanted law and order. 3, I wanted the central government to be massively downsized and disempowered. That's why I voted for Trump. And by these criteria, in terms of delivering to your voters the things they voted for, it's difficult to find a more successful, more responsive first 100 days anywhere in the annals of presidential history. In terms of border security, according to the White House, illegal alien encounters are down 95% and gotaways are down by over 99%. But don't take Trump's word for it. Here it is in the fake news media's own words. CBS News. Amid Trump crackdown, illegal border crossings plunged to levels not seen in decades. Axios. Border crossings plunged to lowest levels in decades. Reuters. Migrant arrests at U.S.-Mexico border in March, lowest ever recorded. Los Angeles Times. California-Mexico border once overwhelmed, now nearly empty. And the criterion of embarrassment definitely applies here, I think. If you don't know what the criterion of embarrassment is and how it works, it's a concept from biblical scholarship that says if a source writes something that is potentially damaging to his own group or his own worldview or his own politics, then the thing he wrote is more likely to be true. And that's why statements like these actually mean more when they are coming from inveterate serial-lying fake news sludge-mongers, because even for those scumbags, there is a threshold beyond which they can no longer pretend that true things are not true. And obviously, this is a very bitter pill to swallow for the Democrats, who spent 4 years swearing up and down while their fake news interlocutors nodded along robotically that nope, absolutely not. We didn't throw the border open. What are you talking about? In fact, we are doing our level best to enforce the law and keep unauthorized individuals out of the country. There is absolutely nothing else we can do within our power to secure that border without Congress fixing our broken immigration system. Which, of course, was always a red herring anyway, because immigration and border security are not the same thing, and they never have been. The point being, it's really not a good look for the Dems. After all their fevered protestations that securing the border is logistically impossible, just to watch Trump secure the border in under 30 days, just like he said he was going to. Now, what else did Trump's voters vote for? Well, they voted for law and order. What does law and order mean? It means, first of all, taking all the foreign criminals who are in the country and getting them the hell out of the country. As President-elect Trump stated on 19 January, the day before he assumed office, quote, "We will expel every single illegal alien gang member and migrant criminal operating on American soil and remove the savage gang Tren de Aragua from the United States," end quote. In the 100 days since, over 600 verified TDA members have been apprehended and removed, among a total number of over 150,000 violent criminal aliens in total. And if the Democrats had any political sense whatsoever, they either wouldn't have said anything or they would have stood up and applauded. Because, believe it or not, getting face-tattooed South American prison gangsters out of our country is something that enjoys very wide, very broad-based public support at the population level in the United States. Is there any conceivable political dividend to be gained for the Democrats by making religious pilgrimages to El Salvador to gaze lovingly into the eyes of Saint Kilmar the Beneficent while gently stroking his hand, you know, the one with the MS-13 knuckle tats all over it? No, there is not. But some of these maniacs have lost the plot so long ago and so completely, I don't think there's any way for them to get it back. If you are a professional elected politician, and there's no little brief pang of self-reflection that makes you wonder, maybe have I not picked the most appealing group of people to rally around? Then you're probably not going to remain a professional elected politician for very much longer. And what was that third pillar, the third cornerstone of the things every Trump voter voted for? Well, they wanted someone to take a chainsaw or a blowtorch or the metaphorical implement of your choosing to the last 90-plus years of the inexorable, unchecked expansion of the federal administrative state, along with all the graft and waste and fraud and abuse and corruption that have accompanied it. And Elon Musk had already volunteered for the job as we went to the polls in November. You want to talk about a wildly popular plank in an election platform? There it is. Because as we know, we've had a succession of presidents and presidential candidates, both parties going back nearly a century, as previously mentioned, who have all talked a very big game about getting waste and fraud and abuse under control. But here, in 2024, finally, we had a candidate who sounded like he was serious about freaking doing it. And he had a plan for doing it. And he had one of the richest and smartest men who ever lived standing ready to head up the project. And what have we heard from the Democrats? Well, nothing original. That's for damn sure. At least they have been smart enough not to actually try and defend some of the things that are being cut because they are indefensible. So they have opted instead to pull out that dusty old hymnal and turn to the page that says, those evil Republicans, they just want to take away Grandma's Social Security, they want to take away Grandpa's Medicare, which, of course, is the same song they were singing in 1970 and 1980 and 1990 and 2000. They fall back on the greatest hits every time when they have got nothing else, and that is exactly what we are seeing here. Has there been any sort of indication that any legitimate recipient of Social Security or Medicare or any other New Deal federal entitlement program is at risk of not receiving their lawful benefits? No, of course there hasn't. In fact, cleaning up the waste and fraud that are in the system, if anything, will make it more likely for those entitlement programs to survive long enough for, say, someone my age to potentially collect on them one day. And personally, I have never once operated in the belief that I will ever see a Social Security check, since the year the program is scheduled to go insolvent and fall off the cliff is the very same exact year that when I am scheduled to reach theoretical retirement age. And if I one day do see a Social Security check, I won't thank FDR for it. I will thank Donald Trump and Elon Musk. So clearly, in its quest to come up with a wildly distorted and damningly negative view of Trump's first 100 days, obviously the fake news performance artists can't report on the fact that Trump's voters are uniformly delighted with his performance and his attention to fulfilling his campaign pledges. So they've had to adopt the narrative that says he's destroying the economy, because there's been a bit of volatility in the stock market, and oh god, there was a 0.3% GDP contraction in the first quarter, so obviously the sky is falling. And everything is bad and terrible and awful because now the media and the Democrats, they have adopted the very self-same attitude they used to castigate the Republicans for indulging in. The attitude that says, let's just keep kicking those cans down the road. And as long as the stock market's happy and the GDP numbers are good, then everything must be fine, right? And we can continue massively expanding the central government and spending like a bunch of profligate drunken sailors and consigning everyone's great-grandchildren to the poorhouse before they're ever born. And this is an area where, it has to be said, the administration's messaging hasn't really been as good as it might have been. The best economic messengers they have been Vice President Vance and Tim Besant, the Treasury Secretary. Those are the guys who understand the process and are best able to articulate it in a coherent way to a wide audience. And we have to take the medicine. It's a fitting allegory. We have to take the medicine. Sometimes you don't want to take the medicine. You know it's going to taste bad. You know it has icky side effects, but you take it anyway because you want to cure the disease. What's the disease in this case? Waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption syndrome. How do you cure it? By clearing the waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption out of the damn system. But when you clear the bad stuff out of the system, that means you're clearing it out of the economy too. So that means, for example, when you shut down the USAID fraud machine, that is going to have a downstream effect on the stock market because fraudsters are not fools. As they receive these ill-gotten gains through the fraud machine, they are taking some portion of it and feeding it back into the stock market because, like anybody else, they want to maximize their gains and make as much money as they possibly can. Now, when you remove all of that stuff from the equation, yes, obviously it is going to cause a market correction because there is no way that you can thread that needle. You can't remove all the fraud and abuse from the system without also removing it from the market. You can't fix the problems that need fixing while also propping up the Dow and the NASDAQ and the GDP numbers, which means the corrections we're seeing, they really don't have anything to do with any intrinsic weakness in the economy or the leading indicators. The leading indicators all look fine. The corrections we're seeing arise from bad, corrupt actors getting their cash flow cut off. Their cash flow that was originating in your pocket and my pocket, and that is a good and proper thing. So if you don't enjoy having your money stolen, if you would prefer to live in a world where our national debt doesn't explode by an order of magnitude every 8 to 12 months, if you care about fixing the systemic problems that have bedeviled us since the days of Woodrow Wilson and nobody else has given a damn enough to try and fix, there is nothing not to like about the first 100 days of Donald Trump's second term. That is my Curmudgeonalysis, and I am sticking to it. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.